one of the most underrated person to know, in my opinion. We're going to be speaking about inclusivity and integration, especially between people with disabilities and people without disabilities, and kind of like our experience with like the special ed world and the, working with people who may have disabilities in different forms. Loreen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to do this interview with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. You know, I still remember when I first met you. I believe you were running for to be on the education board for Winona Grove.
Yes.
Man, it was just like, wow, who is this lady and why have I not known her before? So, personally, I was born with a disability, a hearing disability, and a facial cranial disability disease, as they would say. And then I worked in the adaptive group, and then I also worked at a school system with the after-school program and volunteering in the Winona Grove School District. So I have kind of like just a lot of different opportunities to learn and watch, and so it's just kind of interesting to see what has progressed and what is still, for some reason, an issue. Can you introduce yourself and like what involvement you've had?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, still have the opportunity of serving on the Winona Grove School Board. So this is my second year as president of the school board. But my experiences with disabilities really comes from working as an educator in Milwaukee Public Schools. Okay. So I was a special education teacher, and for many years I worked with severe autistic students. Okay. At the high school level, and then also students that kind of have some behavioral issues as well. So I've done that about 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot of exposure, so doing IEPs, helping students transition from school to work, the work setting. So just a lot of experiences in that way. And then also, I served as a caregiver for my father, who had a stroke, and he had some physical disabilities after the stroke. So he actually had multiple strokes, and he was in a wheelchair, and then had some speech impediments as a result of that. Oh, wow. So served as a caregiver for my dad for about 3 years. He passed away in 2020, but definitely I understood a lot of the challenges that he faced and people that have physical disabilities. So lots of experience in that way.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been kind of like a shift in like perspective when that did happen to your father.
Absolutely.
I mean, like you must have been like, holy cow, like seemingly it could be like from one day, you know, just kind of in your world, and then the next day like, whoa. Like to lose a privilege of a basic, you know, skill.
Absolutely. He was very young when he had his first stroke, so he was only 52 years old.
Wow. He
was a business owner of several hardware stores throughout Milwaukee, just very busy, but I think he didn't really take care of his health. Yeah. And I think, you know, having regular checkups, and also he was a smoker. So I just think, you know, a lot of health issues that he just didn't attend to was a result of him having a stroke. Wow. And again, he had multiple ones, so about 3 strokes after that. So it was definitely a challenge for our entire family, just to see my dad, who was the breadwinner of the family, to now needing support on a daily basis.
Wow.
So.
Wow. And that must have been hard for him, because like going from one end to the other end in such a short time would be so frustrating, I'm assuming. I don't know, obviously, but wow. Yeah. And then you said you were a special education teacher. How did you get involved with that?
Absolutely. Being a single mom, I really wanted to find a career that I could have a balance. Okay. So that I could be with my kids during the summer. And so I just was introduced to education, when I was working in Illinois. And I worked as a substitute teacher at first, and the principal approached me and said, "You would really be a great teacher. You should really consider
that's so kind.
working in this field." And so 13 years later, I, I still remain in the field, and I really enjoyed helping students. So I worked with students starting at 5th grade all throughout high school. And I think high school was probably my favorite level of education.
I can see that, yeah. I mean, I like the little kids, but I've never had experience working with older kids, because I feel like I'm a kid myself, too.
That makes sense.
Wow, that's so crazy. So with that experience, like, I want to go into, like, misconception of people with disabilities, and, like, you know, just kind of like the special education program, since you have a lot of experience in that. What do you believe would be a big is a big misconception in that area?
Sure. I think there's so many different misconceptions, but one, behavioral issues. I think that sometimes people perceive that that they don't want to learn, or that they're purposely misbehaving, and sometimes it's a result of their disability that they're acting out in that way. I think also a misconception is about ability. I think students with disabilities have a lot of ability, but they have to been given the chance to do things. So just make an assumption based off of a visual look, or maybe their performance in their work, people assume that they cannot perform a task, but many times they can, and actually can maybe even exceed it if they're given an opportunity.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember myself being in the system, and like, you know, I was lucky that I had parents who were like very like, nope, you're gonna learn, you're gonna, you know, work on it. Very grateful for that opportunity. But as I grew up in the system, and even becoming into like a volunteer and as an after school teacher, put in that misconception of idea that they were either like a troublemaker, or that they were just, oh, there's no help. And I was working with kindergartners, and I got so frustrated. I was just like, what do you mean? It's a 5-year-old.
Right.
This is like literally the prime time of development.
Sure.
So with that, I get frustrated because, you know, in a day-to-day basis and like on special events, it's just like there's these people who either they don't know, or they're just like they're afraid to frustrate the child. Since oftentimes, like, I know when I was a child and I was frustrated, I would be a pain in the butt.
Sure.
I'm not gonna lie. And my communication was different because of my hearing disability. I would just, you know, outburst in a different way. I operated differently. And unfortunately, sometimes it came off as like, oh, no, we're not working with that, or I don't have the tool, or maybe it's just the tools, they don't have the tools. I mean, there are so many different factors. So an example would be, I had a neighbor, which I think really did help formulate my upbringing. He had a cognitive disability. He was way older than me, like an old person to me as a child. I don't know how old he was.
Sure.
But he, you know, a lot of people would be like, oh, Marky Mark, and I, as a child, would get frustrated, and I actually would act more authoritative, and like he would like sometimes push boundaries, and like I would be like, no, you know better, and it was a very interesting experience because I would never as a child speak to someone that way.
Sure.
But because I knew there was more in him, and I knew he was just taking advantage of people misunderstanding,
Sure.
or not knowing how to work with him. And so as a child, I was like I was telling adults nearby to give this man a chance.
Yes.
Like to treat him like a human being almost.
Absolutely. I think treating people as individuals too. And it sounds like you really was intuitive into his personality and things that he was interested in. And I think that helps a lot. People with disabilities are no different from anyone else in that there's needs that you should listen to their needs. So for instance, I had a student in high school that when I first became the teacher, I was told that this student was combative, aggressive, and I should watch out for him.
Oh, wow.
And
those are strong words.
Yes, absolutely. And he had a diagnosis of autism, and I think some other dual diagnosis that I'm not sure of. But basically, I think a couple months before, he was really angry and took a lot of textbooks and other objects and threw it out the window. And so he was kind of deemed as this child that was extremely aggressive. And so everyone was kind of terrified of him. I really wanted to learn the student rather than all of this information that I was told. And I think that really helped our relationship. So I think he had years of being treated as an aggressor. And I think he was told often that he was a bad child, and he believed it. So oftentimes when I was teaching him, he would say, I'm a bad boy, I know I'm this. And I'm like, wow. So we have to work on changing this mindset. So it took a while. And I did see some aggression in the beginning, but I would sometimes get on the floor with him and talk with him and try to work it out. So long story short, the same student that was considered an aggressor and many teachers were fearful of him, he actually worked at our shop in the school. So it was, he could sell cookies and candies, and he was actually the leader of this group that would do that. And he was so excited every day. He would come and make sure that he was on time for work, and did really, really well. Also, after high school, he actually got gainful employment and is still working today, despite all of these things that he was told. I'm not saying that I'm the only person that contributed to that, to his growth, but I think having a mindset of treating them where they, or meeting a student where they are, and believing in them, I think makes a difference.
The idea of adaptability.
Yes.
From both parties, on our end as a society, but also on that person's end, and created expectations that they can, reach to at a time. Okay, first let's expect you to, do this, and then once you are able to, on a pattern basis, do that expectation, level it up to the next expectation. And really it's just progress, just little by little, and given a chance. And sometimes when I think for adaptability, you need to look at the big picture, and then sometimes you just have to ask, what do you want? What do you need? I love that I was born with a disability, because, as a child, I was like, why me? Come on! I get frustrated. I'm like, what do you mean? And I would be a student, and they'd be like, they don't work as hard as me. And I would say that to a teacher, and of course this poor teacher didn't know what to say. She's like, yeah, you're right. But now that I have a little more time to observe and learn and, interact, it's I actually see it as a gift. And I really hope that I can assist with integrating the two groups. Because as a child, I was in special ed classes, and then I would be in regular classes because my father and mother both were persistent on making sure that I was still involved with the student body. And I was very lucky that my parents were progressive, because at that time, it was not really, for my understanding, it seems you didn't really think about it. You're going to go to school, great. The teacher told me that, great. Especially in the early 2000s. I feel like nowadays people are more they're more aware of their rights and what they can do, especially if they have an IEP.
Sure.
They're like, oh, like, let's utilize that IEP for this benefit. At least from my experience. Well, when you do an IEP or when you did do an IEP, did you feel like as time went by, parents were more aware of what their rights were?
There are some families that don't understand a lot of those acronyms that they throw on.
Oh, yeah.
It's the IEP, you
Yeah.
know, right? It's
Yeah.
an acronym. So I think really explaining the students' rights, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
and making sure that the accommodations that are needed for that child are the best for that child. So I think sometimes I would find that sometimes parents just didn't know what the resources were or how to support their child. I think it's so important that a child is able to advocate for themselves.
Yes.
So I really try to, in the IEP, allow the child to voice their concerns because they know best what's the accommodations that they need.
Yeah, they go to it every day.
Absolutely. And so I think early on, if you can give a child a voice with their IEP, that is really, really helpful. And I also think they change over time. So maybe a student needs extra supports or maybe a person with them at all times. But as they grow and mature, they may not need those same supports. And so I'm just making sure that they know what resources are available and how to navigate that as well. I think it's also important that they have a voice early on because as an adult, there isn't an IEP, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you navigate the world? How do you advocate for yourself? If you start that early on, that's a lot easier.
Yeah. But there is a DVR, right? For adults?
There is DVR.
Okay. Is that the same or no? I'm not very familiar with DVR.
Sure. So DVR provides supports, but it's not as intense as maybe an IEP where you have a whole team with you at all times. So I think it just depends on the disability and the person. But DVR is pretty much more for vocational, so for the job.
Okay.
To provide supports on the job.
And I'd like to make sure that the person who's like going into the job is being heard and respected and making sure that the communication is understood by both parties, correct?
So serving as a liaison between the employer and the person, yes.
Okay, wow. Now, my question was that like because I still feel like, personally, we're still segregated. And maybe that's just me and my cynical mind, because I'm still, like, subconsciously harboring things from what happened to me as a child. But I feel like when I look around, I'm like, why? Like, why are there, like, you know, programs for people with disabilities, and why are we not more, like, integrated? Like, how can I help connect the gap? I feel like there's a gap, and maybe I'm still cynical from my childhood, so I may be a little, like, narrow-minded in that area.
Sure.
But I don't know what your perspective is on that, like the segregation. Do you think it's segregated, or do you think we're more integrated than, you know, than I might be seeing it as?
Sure. So I think over time things have gotten better. So I do. I absolutely. I maybe when you were in school, and I know even early on in my teaching career, things were more divided. I think educators, I think our government has really sees the benefit of integration and inclusion. So I know in many schools, students are integrated. So the particular high school that I taught at, all of the students, despite their disabilities, went to all of their classes. So they didn't just stay in one classroom. They were able to go to different classrooms, and they got modifications to help them in the classroom if they needed it. So I think that's kind of the direction that things are going in housing and workplace and so forth. is more of an integrated.
Okay, good. I need to, no, I don't know, I just like, I don't know, I feel like I'm cynical, and I should probably go to therapy probably, but, like, I just, like, I still hold, like, you know, what I saw, like, an example in 2019, as an after-school teacher, I would see, like, reward systems, and it was, like, guided towards certain groups of people. I don't think I get it, but I didn't get it. Like, I understood that you wanna, like, help the child to get on track, if you wanna say, but at the same time, I felt like it would have been way better, from my perspective, is if it was a team for the reward, instead of, like, individuals who got it, like, on the side.
Sure.
But, I mean, I don't know, I mean, I never got an education in education, so I don't know how that works. But, do you think it would be beneficial to do a group reward system? Or do you think that's not that's like comparing apples to oranges?
I think it just varies on the situation.
Yeah.
So, I'm not for the candy incentives or so forth, but I think students do need some type of incentive, and sometimes rewards do motivate them. Yeah. So I think you just have to be creative, and again, kind of based off of the students themselves. So it just varies.
Well, that's a good point. I know I have incentives for myself. Like an example, like for work, like if I still have money the day before paycheck, I get myself a meal for lunch.
I like that.
I'm like, okay, well, if I can keep cash in the bank, then I can have a meal the Thursday before my paycheck. And it's so silly. It's like, what the heck? Just keep your money. But for some reason, that works.
And if it's an incentive to motivate you, absolutely.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure those incentives are well meant and not like candy. And being like, okay, if you're good, here's candy. Like, I know we're animals, but I'd rather not act like an animal. So yeah. But I really do appreciate like having the experience of what I've learned, and growing. And I really want to keep like, growing and understanding how we can unite all together, people with disabilities, without disabilities, and really find a way for everyone to adapt for a unity.
And I think we still have gains to make in that area, but I really feel overall that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I'm excited
Yes.
now. I feel hopeful. I love being hopeful. Oh my God, this is why I like talking to Loreen. She always looks at the positivity, but she's not naive. She's not naive. She's very, you look at the big picture. I love it. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Absolutely.